Chapter 1. The Divorce Papers at Table 12. My wife placed a white envelope beside my untouched dinner and said, "I can't keep pretending this marriage isn't embarrassing." We were sitting at Table 12 inside the Rainier Grand Hotel, surrounded by 200 executives, investors, engineers, and department heads from Asteron Medical Systems. Most of them knew Vanessa Mercer as the polished senior vice president who could turn a quarterly forecast into a standing ovation. Almost none of them knew me as anything more than her quiet husband who fixed industrial equipment for a living. Vanessa rested one hand on the envelope. Her nails were perfectly done. Her dark blue dress probably cost more than the charcoal suit I had bought 6 years earlier and still wore to every formal event. "Open it," she said. I looked at her face, searching for some sign that this was a threat, a dramatic attempt to force a conversation we had both avoided. There was none. "What is it?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Divorce papers." Behind her, the company orchestra played a soft jazz arrangement. Someone at the next table laughed at a joke. A waiter poured wine as if my marriage had not just ended between the salad plate and the bread basket. I had arrived alone that evening because Vanessa said she needed to prepare with the executive team. At registration, a young employee glanced at the worn leather tool case in my hand and pointed me toward the service corridor. "Hotel maintenance checks in downstairs," he said. "I'm a guest," I told him. His face reddened as he searched the list. "Daniel Mercer." "Right. Sorry, sir." I did not take offense. Robert Alvarez, the Tacoma plant manager, had asked me to inspect a returned flow shield valve before the weekend. The sample was inside the case, along with the handwritten notebook I carried to every field visit. Vanessa saw me enter the ballroom. Our eyes met for less than a second before she turned back to Grant Kellerman, Asteron's chief operating officer. Grant was 42, confident, silver at the temples, and skilled at making every conversation feel like a negotiation he had already won. A small metal pin shaped like a lighthouse gleamed on his lapel. During her speech, Vanessa thanked the executive team and called Grant the architect of Asteron's next chapter. She spoke about courage, ambition, and refusing to accept small futures. She never introduced me. Now she sat across from me, ending our 7-year marriage in the same room, where she had praised another man for giving the company a future. "You could have done this at home," I said. "I try to talk to you at home." "No. You told me the house was too small, my truck was too old, and I lacked ambition. You didn't tell me you had hired a lawyer." Her jaw tightened. "Because every serious conversation with you ends the same way. You say you're content. You say money isn't everything. You repair something that should have been replaced and act like that proves character." I thought it proved I could repair things. "That's exactly what I mean." She lowered her voice. "I earn $285,000 a year. I have spent 7 years explaining why my husband still takes contract jobs and drives a truck with rust near the wheel well. I earn enough to support myself. $72,000 is not a future, Daniel. Not the future I worked for." The number was accurate. It was what Mercer Reliability Services paid me. It was what appeared on our joint tax returns as my active income. Vanessa had never asked why a man with an engineering background, a family trust, and unusual freedom over his schedule had chosen to keep his business small. I had never volunteered the full answer. "Is there someone else?" I asked. Her gaze shifted for half a second toward Grant. "The problem is that I outgrew you." That wasn't my question. Before she could respond, Grant appeared beside her chair. "Everything all right?" he asked. Vanessa gave him a look that was too familiar. "It will be." Grant turned to me. "This probably isn't the place for a scene. I wasn't making one. You're upset. Understandably. But Vanessa has responsibilities tonight." I stood and picked up the envelope. "Vanessa can speak for herself." Grant lifted 2 fingers toward a security supervisor near the ballroom entrance. That gesture told me more than anything Vanessa had said. 2 guards approached. One of them looked embarrassed. "Sir, we've been asked to escort you outside." I looked at Vanessa. She could have stopped it with one sentence. She reached for her wine instead. I walked through the ballroom carrying my old tool case, while people from Asteron pretended not to stare. People whose retirement plans, salaries, and stock options were tied to decisions made by a holding company they had never seen. People working inside a business whose foundation my father had poured before some of them were born. I said nothing. In the parking garage, I sat in my truck and opened the petition. Vanessa wanted temporary possession of our queen and townhouse. She described me as financially dependent and underemployed. She wanted an expedited division of marital property and restrictions on my access to her corporate files. A loose page slid from the packet and landed against the gear shift. It was not part of the divorce filing. Across the top, in small gray letters, were the words, Project Harbor, Management Retention Schedule. Grant's lighthouse pin came back to me. I put the page inside my leather case, closed it carefully, and called Evelyn Shaw. Evelyn had been my father's corporate attorney before becoming the managing trustee of Northlight Holdings. At 62, she had a way of becoming quieter when everyone else became emotional. I read the heading to her. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked, "Where did you get that?" It was mixed in with Vanessa's divorce papers. Do not sign anything. Do not send her a message. Do not confront Grant. Evelyn, what is Project Harbor? Her answer was careful. I don't know yet, but Northlight was never notified about it. I looked back at the hotel elevators. Vanessa was somewhere above me, probably explaining my removal as proof that I could not handle rejection. I started the truck. Whatever Project Harbor was, my wife had planned her exit before she handed me that envelope. And if Northlight had not been notified, she might have been planning more than a divorce. Chapter 2. The life she had already left. I drove straight from the hotel to our townhouse with the divorce papers on the passenger seat and the Project Harbor page locked inside my tool case. I expected Vanessa to come home later. I expected anger, explanations, maybe one honest conversation after months of cold dinners and closed doors. Instead, I found a house already arranged for my absence. My key still worked, but the alarm rejected the code I had used for 5 years. I shut it off at the wall before the monitoring company could call. In the living room, the framed photo from our wedding was gone. So were the photographs from our trip to Oregon and the picture of us beside Lydia's hospital bed after her surgery. Vanessa's clothes had disappeared from the bedroom closet. Her jewelry box, laptop dock, work binders, and personal files were gone too. My clothes had been folded into plastic storage containers in the guest room. A letter from her attorney sat on top. It instructed me not to remove joint property, alter accounts, enter Vanessa's home office, or contact her except through counsel. I read the phrase Vanessa's home office twice. That room had once been the place where I sat beside her until 2 in the morning while she completed her MBA assignments. I opened our banking app. The joint checking account had held $38,400 that morning. Vanessa had transferred $31,000 into an individual account shortly before the gala. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. I could have moved the remaining balance. I did not. I downloaded the transaction record and emailed it to myself. Then I walked through the house. At the kitchen table, I remembered Vanessa studying finance while I reviewed her practice presentations. She used to laugh when I corrected the way she explained manufacturing risk. "You make machines sound like stubborn people," she once said. "They usually fail for the same reasons," I told her. Pressure, neglect, and bad information. Back then, she had looked at me as if that answer was clever. Years later, she started hearing it as proof that I was content to remain a technician. When the furnace failed, I repaired it instead of buying a new system. When she wanted a larger house, I asked why 2 people needed 5 bedrooms. When she suggested replacing my truck, I said the engine still had another 100,000 miles in it. None of those choices were forced by poverty. Vanessa simply assumed they were. That assumption had not appeared from nowhere. My father, Thomas Mercer, founded Astron Medical Systems before I was old enough to understand what ownership meant. By the time I was a teenager, I had watched relatives become friendly when the company's value rose and disappear when a financing crisis nearly destroyed it. I saw business partners flatter my father at dinners, then attack him in meetings. After he died, privacy felt safer than honesty. I inherited a large part of his interest and later acquired more during Astron's 2018 recapitalization. The shares were held through Northlight Holdings, along with the intellectual property trust that licensed Astron's most valuable valve technology. Vanessa knew I had a family trust, Before our wedding, she signed a premarital agreement protecting it, just as the agreement protected any inheritance she might receive. I described Northlight as a private family legacy arrangement. That description was technically true and emotionally dishonest. I had never told her the trust controlled Asteron. I had never told her how much it was worth. I had paid much of her remaining MBA tuition through distributions that appeared to come from consulting income and investments. When she was unemployed twice, I supported us without explaining why the numbers always worked. I told myself I wanted to know she loved me rather than my father's company. Standing in that empty house, I had to admit the uglier part. Keeping the truth hidden had also allowed me to avoid the risk of being fully known. Vanessa's betrayal was hers, but the silence inside our marriage had not belonged to only one person. The next morning, I met Evelyn at Hartwell Pierce in downtown Seattle. She spread the Project Harbor page across a conference table and examined the footer, the document number, and a partially visible signature block. "This refers to management equity," she said. "Not a bonus. Equity after a transaction. Sale or merger? Most likely a sale. Northlight received nothing." "Correct. As Asteron's controlling shareholder, Northlight had inspection rights and approval rights. Management could discuss strategy, but it could not promise post-sale ownership interests as if approval were guaranteed." Evelyn leaned back. "What do you want me to do? Find out whether this is legitimate, premature, or fraudulent?" "I asked what you want, Daniel, not what you want to know." I looked through the window at downtown traffic. "I want to understand why my wife ended our marriage. That is not a corporate purpose." "I know." "Then separate the two now. Vanessa has the legal right to leave you. She does not have the right to misuse Asteron. If we investigate, it will be for the company." I nodded. "Do not reveal me. Do not stop the transaction yet." Her eyes narrowed. "Because you want to catch them? Because we do not know what they have done." "That is the right answer. Keep giving it." That afternoon, I hired Aaron Blake, a divorce attorney Evelyn trusted. Aaron reviewed the petition, the bank transfer, and our premarital agreement. "Do not send emotional messages," he said. "Do not move money to make a point. Do not surprise her at work. Judges remember the person who stays reasonable. Vanessa is asking for emergency occupancy. She may get temporary use of the house. That is not ownership. You can fight over a building or protect your position. I recommend the second." By October 10th, I had rented a furnished apartment in South Lake Union. I packed clothes, technical books, several personal photographs, my father's watch, and the leather tool case. Nothing else. Before leaving, I stood in the kitchen where Vanessa had once told me she cared more about security than luxury. I finally understood that, somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing a difference between the two. The next morning, I drove to Asteron's Bellevue headquarters for a reliability meeting that had been scheduled weeks earlier. I pressed my badge against the reader. The light flashed red. A security officer came from behind the desk, holding an email printout. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," he said. "Your credentials were terminated this morning." I looked at the signature line. Vanessa had personally ordered it. Chapter 3. Locked out of my own company. The security officer seemed more uncomfortable than I was. "Can I have the written basis?" I asked. He handed me the email. It stated that Mercer Reliability Services had failed to provide critical reports and that my ongoing divorce from a senior executive created an unacceptable conflict. Both claims were misleading. My reports had been delivered. Vanessa had no assigned authority over my contract. And the personal conflict had become a company issue only because she had made it one. "I also need your badge," the officer said. I placed it in his hand. Through the glass wall behind him, I saw several employees looking away too late. Vanessa stood inside a conference room with Grant. She watched me surrender the badge, but did not come out. Grant did. He buttoned his jacket as he crossed the lobby. The lighthouse pin was gone, but his confidence was not. "Asteron needs serious professionals during this stage of growth," he said. "I am a serious professional. Your firm is one person and an old truck." My reports were delivered. "Then you can address that through procurement." Vanessa ordered the termination. Grant glanced toward the conference room. Vanessa acted to protect the company from a messy situation. "You mean the situation she created?" His smile was small. "That response is exactly why this was necessary. I folded the email and put it in my coat pocket. I'll address it properly. For a moment, disappointment crossed his face. I think he had expected anger. Maybe he wanted me to raise my voice in front of witnesses. I left instead. Robert Alvarez called before I reached the parking lot exit. They told us not to communicate with you, he said. The background noise told me he was calling from the Tacoma plant floor. I'm already violating that instruction. Do not risk your job for me. This isn't about your divorce. Your last report is missing from the shared system. Missing how? The folder is there. The file isn't. Do you have a local copy? No. I reviewed it in the system. You recommended expanded testing on the flow shield returns. I remembered the report. Several valves had shown intermittent performance changes after a low-temperature sterilization cycle. The data was incomplete, but I had recommended a hold until we understood the pattern. Preserve whatever records you already have, I said. Do not download anything you are not authorized to access. That sounds like lawyer language. It is now. I forwarded the credential email to Aaron and Evelyn. Aaron replied with 3 words, good. Keep everything. 4 days later, Vanessa asked to meet at a coffee shop near Lake Union to discuss keeping the divorce civilized. She arrived in a cream-colored coat and set her phone face down between us. I did not want your contract involved, she began, but people were talking about your marriage or your relationship with Grant. Her hand tightened around the coffee cup. You are trying to make this uglier than it needs to be. I asked one question at the gala. You did not answer it. She looked toward the window. Grant and I became close. How close? Our relationship became personal after I had already left the marriage emotionally. That phrase sounded rehearsed, probably because it had been. When was that? Does the date change anything? It changes whether you are telling the truth. She pushed the cup away. This is why I ended it. Every conversation becomes an investigation. You removed $31,000 from our account and canceled my access to Asteron. An investigation seems reasonable. I moved money because I didn't know how you would react. You watched security remove me from your gala. Our gala. She corrected herself automatically, then seemed to realize what she had said. Asteron's gala. I let the silence sit. Vanessa finally opened a folder. If you sign the proposed settlement quickly, I'm willing to let you keep the old truck and all your consulting equipment without dispute. Those are already mine. I'm trying to be generous. You are offering me my own tools. You have no idea how expensive litigation can become, Daniel. I'm giving you a clean exit. Her tone carried concern, but not for me. She believed I had no meaningful assets and no ability to endure a prolonged case. Why did you have authority to terminate a technical contract outside your department? I asked. I was protecting both of us. From gossip? Yes. Or from something in my report? Her eyes sharpened. What report? I watched her too carefully. She noticed. I'm done with this conversation, she said, standing. Have Aaron contact my attorney. That evening, an email arrived from an address I did not recognize. The message was from Maya Chun, Asteron's Director of Quality Assurance. Please do not reply from a company account, she wrote. I need to know whether you kept your original notes on the flow shield sterilization failures. I called the number in her signature from a prepaid phone Evelyn's office had provided for sensitive corporate matters. Maya answered on the second ring. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know who else to contact. Tell me what happened. Your findings became part of Quality Incident Report 24-117. The initial classification was potential patient impact risk. That would trigger a shipping hold. It did. For 48 hours. What changed? The report was downgraded to routine manufacturing variants. Based on what additional testing? There wasn't any. I sat at the small dining table in my temporary apartment and opened the leather case. Who approved the downgrade? There was a meeting. Grant attended. Vanessa attended. Operations, quality, and strategic growth. Why was strategic growth in a quality classification meeting? Maya was quiet. That is what I asked, she said. Inside my notebook, I found the pages from the Tacoma inspection. Dates, lot numbers, temperature ranges, pressure readings, and a sketch showing where the valve material had deformed. I have my original notes. Good. Because your digital report is gone. I know. Maya sent me a partial PDF. At the top was the document number, QIR 24-117. The original risk language had been replaced. Beside the lowered classification was an electronic approval. Vanessa Elise Mercer. I compared the defect description with my notebook. Same sterilization condition. Same intermittent restriction. Same 3 production lots. The report had not been misunderstood. Someone had taken a known concern, reduced its seriousness without new evidence, and removed the file that challenged them. By dawn, Maya and I had arranged to meet near the Tacoma plant. Chapter 4. The report they buried. Maya chose a waterfront cafe that opened before sunrise. She sat in the back corner with a paper cup and a folder pressed flat beneath both hands. I printed only records I was already authorized to retain, she said before I sat down. No restricted patient data. No files outside my role. Good. I will not ask you to steal anything. Relief passed over her face. She opened the folder. 12 customers had reported intermittent flow interruptions. No confirmed deaths had occurred, but 3 hospitals had replaced affected units as a precaution. The deformation is microscopic, Maya explained. After a specific low-temperature sterilization cycle, the valve can recover unevenly. It may test normally, then restrict flow under sustained use. That is why the bench test missed it, I said. She nodded. Your report recommended a shipping hold, expanded lot testing, supplier review, and notification to the risk committee. Those were minimum steps. Grant called the hold commercially reckless. He said it would have to be disclosed during due diligence. Due diligence for Westbridge? Maya looked up sharply. You know about Westbridge? I know there is a transaction called Project Harbor. Nothing more than I am legally entitled to know. She slid another page toward me. It summarized the meeting where the classification changed. Vanessa argued that the complaints could be isolated user calibration problems, Maya said. Quality objected. Grant ended the discussion. The report came back rewritten. And my file disappeared. Yes. I asked Maya to go to work as usual and preserve records through proper channels. I did not promise protection I had not yet formally arranged. Robert met me later near the Tacoma plant's receiving entrance. He registered me as a supplier visitor and kept me inside a non-restricted inspection area. I'm not sneaking you onto the production floor, he said. I would not ask you to. He brought 2 returned valve assemblies in sealed trays. I inspected them through the clear protective covers and compared the visible stress marks with my notes. The same pale crescent appeared near the pressure regulation seat. Robert watched my face. You found something? The pattern is consistent. Not proof by itself, but consistent. He handed me a printed shipping summary. One of the flagged lots was released after the hold was shortened. Who approved it? Vanessa's electronic authorization is in the system. I did not photograph the parts or remove a sample. Without formal custody, either action could have damaged the investigation. I wrote down the lot numbers and asked Robert to preserve the existing logs exactly as they were. That afternoon, Evelyn prepared a formal shareholder inspection demand on behalf of Northlight. It requested Project Harbor documents, quality committee minutes, flow shield incident records, executive retention agreements, and communications with Westbridge. Northlight's name appeared on the letter. Mine did not. Grant responded that the request was disruptive and overly broad. Priya Nanduri, the chair of Asteron's independent audit committee, rejected his objection. Management does not decide whether the controlling shareholder may inspect material transaction records, she said during a conference call. We will comply under a documented protocol. Priya knew Northlight's owner came from the Mercer family, but until Evelyn explained the personal conflict privately, she had not known the owner was Vanessa's husband. Her reaction was not excitement. It was concern. If Daniel directs this review, she told Evelyn, every result will be challenged as marital retaliation. I agree, I said. You control the process. And if the evidence does not support misconduct, then it does not support misconduct. That answer seemed to satisfy her. On October 22nd, the inspection demand was formally delivered. 3 days later, Evelyn called me to her office. On the conference room screen was a certification Vanessa had signed on September 26th. It stated that no material product risk threatened the proposed transaction. I read her signature twice. A mistaken opinion would have been one thing, but Vanessa had sat in the meeting where the original risk classification was lowered. She had approved the release of a flagged lot. She had signed a transaction certification afterward. She may claim she relied on operations, Evelyn said. Then we determine what she received before signing. You are thinking like an owner now. I'm thinking like an engineer. A signature has to connect to information. The inspection produced a document index the following Monday. Most files had ordinary names: valuation model, employee census, regulatory history, customer concentration. At the bottom was a restricted entry. Management Equity Side Letter, V. Mercer. Evelyn requested access under the inspection order. When the document opened, the divorce stopped looking like a private collapse that happened to overlap with corporate trouble. It became one connected plan. Chapter 5. Project Harbor. The side letter was 6 pages long. Westbridge Equity Partners intended to acquire Asteron for $420 million. Grant would receive 4% of a post-acquisition management pool and become chief executive. Vanessa would receive 2% if she remained through integration and met growth targets. She would also receive a $600,000 retention package over 3 years. The document carried 3 signatures: Grant's, Vanessa's, and a Westbridge managing partner's. The full board had never seen it. Priya read the pages without speaking. Evelyn removed her glasses and placed them carefully on the table. This is not merely premature compensation planning, Priya said. This is a material conflict tied to management's recommendation of the transaction. Vanessa's package depended on closing before the end of the fiscal year. If the deal failed, the equity and retention money disappeared. I calculated the likely value of 2% under Westbridge's projections. Depending on performance, it could become several $1,000,000. For months, Vanessa had told me she wanted a husband with ambition. At the same time, she had been arranging a future in which the company my father built would fund her new life. The emails were worse. Grant described Northlight as passive, fragmented, and unlikely to block the transaction. In one message, Vanessa wrote, "The founder's family no longer participates in operations. Council can manage them when the vote is scheduled." She had typed those words from the office where she kept a photograph of us from our 5th anniversary. She did not know the founder's family came home to her every night. Another email outlined the shareholder presentation. It excluded QAR 24-117 entirely. The valuation appendix assumed the FlowShield license would transfer automatically. "It will not," Evelyn said. She pulled up the license agreement. The intellectual property trust controlled by Northlight owned the FlowShield patents and licensed them to Asteron. A change of control clause required Northlight's written consent before the license could pass to a buyer. Could they buy the shares without it? I asked. They could attempt to, but they would acquire a company unable to manufacture its most profitable product line. That clause could have ended Project Harbor immediately. For several minutes, I imagined the simplest response. One letter, one refusal. Vanessa would learn that her future depended on approval from the husband she had called underemployed. It would have felt satisfying for about an hour. Then Grant could claim the defect was minor, the side letter was normal, and Northlight's refusal was personal interference. Documents could disappear. Witnesses could change their memories. "We continue," I said. Evelyn studied me. "You understand that waiting carries risk." "Yes." Priya recommended hiring Bexley & Rowe, an outside forensic audit firm. Northlight authorized the cost, but Priya controlled the scope, interviews, and reporting. "No instructions through Daniel," she said. "No private conclusions delivered only to him. The audit committee receives everything." "That is how it should be," I said. Separately, Aaron called about Vanessa's first financial disclosure in the divorce. "She listed salary and a current bonus estimate," he said. "No deferred compensation, no management equity, no unvested options tied to a transaction." "I have seen a confidential corporate side letter. Do not send it to me." "Why?" "Because I want it through proper discovery, not through a shareholder inspection conducted for another purpose. We keep these matters separate." Aaron served requests for executive compensation agreements, deferred bonuses, retention arrangements, and transaction-related benefits. That separation mattered. Vanessa was already trying to describe me as a resentful husband using Asteron to remain in her life. If I mixed confidential corporate evidence into the divorce carelessly, she would have a believable argument. During the first week of November, Bexley and Rowe began preserving email archives, access logs, quality records, and transaction files. I spent evenings in my apartment reading only what the protocol allowed. Some nights, I stopped at the sentence where Vanessa dismissed the founder's family. Other nights, I opened our old photographs and tried to identify the moment she had stopped respecting me. There was no single photograph for that. There had been signs. Her reluctance to introduce me at executive dinners. The way she started calling my work repair jobs instead of engineering. The jokes about my truck. Her anger when I declined a country club membership she wanted us to finance. I had seen the distance and treated it as temporary stress. She had seen my privacy and interpreted it as failure. Neither explanation justified the affair or the documents she signed. On November 8th, Vanessa filed a motion in King County Superior Court describing me as deliberately underemployed and financially dependent on her. She asked for exclusive use of the townhouse and an accelerated settlement. The motion attached my tax returns as proof that I had little. My actual ownership documents went into a sealed envelope for the judge. Vanessa would walk into court believing the papers in her hand told the whole story. Chapter 6. Pour on paper. The temporary hearing took place on November 14th. Vanessa sat beside her attorney in a dark business suit, composed enough to look as if she were presenting a quarterly report. I sat with Aaron at the other table. Her attorney described me as a capable engineer who chose to earn less while benefiting from Vanessa's $285,000 salary. They requested exclusive temporary occupancy of the townhouse, reimbursement for selected household expenses, restrictions on my access to Vanessa's corporate files, and an expedited settlement schedule. Aaron did not argue that Vanessa was cruel. He used records. He showed that I had consistently paid the agreed share of household costs. He presented the joint account statement showing Vanessa had transferred $31,000 shortly before serving me. Vanessa's attorney said she moved the money because my reaction was unpredictable. Aaron placed my communication log in front of the judge. There were no threats, surprise visits, or angry messages. Since the gala, I had contacted Vanessa only about legal and property matters. The judge looked at Vanessa. Why was nearly 81% of the joint checking balance moved? I was afraid he would drain it, she said. But he did not move the remaining funds. No. My Northlight ownership schedule was submitted under seal because Asteron was privately held and the interests were protected by our premarital agreement. Vanessa's attorney was told I possessed significant separate property, but the detailed schedule was not read in open court. Vanessa glanced at me, then whispered to her lawyer. I could tell from her expression that she had reduced significant separate property to the family trust she already imagined. An old house, some investments, perhaps a few inherited shares. The judge granted Vanessa temporary occupancy because she had remained in the townhouse and maintained her primary work setup there. It hurt, but it was not a judgment about the marriage. The judge refused to label me financially dependent. She ordered Vanessa to return $15,500, representing my presumptive half of the transferred joint funds pending final accounting. Both of us were ordered to provide complete compensation disclosures. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa approached while our attorney spoke several feet away. You could have avoided this embarrassment, she said. My first offer was fair. You offered me property I already owned. I offered you certainty. Did you disclose every executive benefit connected to Project Harbor? Her face changed before she controlled it. I don't know what you're talking about. You should correct your disclosure if you remember. She walked away and called someone before she reached the elevator. Later, Bexley and Rowe's preservation log showed that Grant instructed Asteron's information technology department to restrict access to archived Project Harbor folders less than an hour after court. The preservation notice had already frozen the metadata. A week later, I returned to the townhouse during a scheduled property retrieval window. Vanessa was present with a neutral third party in the living room. I collected family photographs, technical books, my father's workshop key, and a box of personal papers. Our wedding pictures were face down beneath old tax folders. In a recycling bin near the garage, I found the anniversary book I had made the previous year. It contained ticket stubs, handwritten notes, and photographs from each year of our marriage. The cover was bent. Several pages had separated from the binding. I did not accuse her of throwing it away. I simply placed it with my belongings. You don't need to take broken things just because you made them, Vanessa said. I looked at the book, then at her. No, I said, but I need to decide for myself what is worth keeping. For the first time, her expression softened. It lasted only a moment. As I carried the last box to my truck, she stood at the window. I knew what she saw. A man leaving in an old vehicle with a few books, photographs, and tools. She believed she had reduced me to my visible possessions. That evening, a formal board notice arrived. The shareholder vote on Project Harbor was scheduled for December 20th. Then Priya called. One flagged flow shield lot was approved for release, she said. 32 finished units are scheduled to leave Tacoma tomorrow morning. The investigation was not complete. Revealing Northlight's active control could alert Vanessa and Grant. But 32 units were already assigned to customers. There was no longer a choice between patience and exposure. There was only a choice between protecting the strategy and protecting the people who might receive those machines. Chapter 7. The shipment I could not ignore. Priya sent me the lot numbers while we were still on the phone. I opened my field notebook on the apartment table. All three matched the production group I had flagged. 32 infusion units containing those valves were scheduled to leave Tacoma before 6 the next morning. Evelyn joined the call from home. Northlight can invoke the emergency protection clause in the flow shield license, she said. The intellectual property owner may suspend production or distribution when documented manufacturing conditions threaten safe performance. What will it reveal? That Northlight is actively controlled. Not who controls it. Do it. The immediate delay in retesting could cost more than $1 million. I understand. And once we act, Grant will know the shareholder is not passive. Send the notice. At 5:40 the next morning, Northlight formally suspended distribution from the affected lots. Robert was already at the plant. He secured the loading documents and instructed the logistics team not to release the trucks. The drivers waited behind the gates while Asteron's lawyers confirmed the notice. Vanessa arrived before 7. According to the records and testimony we later reviewed, she went directly to quality assurance and accused Maya of sabotaging a customer shipment. She ordered Maya suspended for insubordination. Priya intervened by phone. Maya Chun is protected under the audit committee's whistleblower protocol, she said. You have no authority to suspend her while the review is active. Vanessa argued that Maya had bypassed management. Priya answered, that is the purpose of a protected reporting channel. Grant demanded an emergency board call. He described the defect as commercially insignificant and accused Northlight of abusing a technical clause to interfere with Project Harbor. I listened from Evelyn's office without identifying myself. She relayed my questions as counsel for the licensor. Ask why expanded lot testing was not completed before release, I said. Grant answered that existing bench results were sufficient. Ask whether the bench protocol reproduced the low-temperature sterilization cycle followed by sustained pressure demand. He hesitated. I would have to defer to engineering. Ask who authorized the release. Vanessa said she had relied on operations. Priya placed the shipping record on the shared screen. Vanessa's electronic approval appeared at the bottom. It is my name, she said, but the recommendation came from the operating team. Robert spoke for the first time. The operating team recommended completion of expanded testing. The release was approved above us. The trucks remained inside the gates. By noon, the immediate delay, customer rescheduling, and expanded testing had cost Asteron an estimated $1.2 million. I approved the expense through Northlight. That afternoon, I drove to my father's workshop near Lake Washington. I had not entered it in months. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and cedar dust. His old workbench still carried the scratches from prototypes he built before Asteron had a proper lab. I found an early flow shield assembly in a labeled drawer. When I was 22, my father and I had spent weekends adjusting the pressure regulation mechanism. I had suggested changing the support geometry after a valve deformed during repeated thermal cycling. The final patent carried his name, mine, and two other engineers' names. My father used to say, "A balance sheet can recover. A patient may not." I had heard him say it so often that I stopped thinking about the words. Standing in that workshop, I understood why the choice at Tacoma had not felt difficult. The company could lose money. It could delay a sale. It could survive embarrassed executives. It could not knowingly send questionable equipment to hospitals and still remain the company my father built. The forensic audit moved faster after the emergency call. Bexley and Rowe recovered the deletion history from my original report. Grant's executive assistant had removed the file after receiving a written instruction from Grant. Vanessa had been copied on the request and raised no objection. Priya expanded the investigation to obstruction and retaliation. Late on December 3rd, Aaron forwarded a settlement proposal from Vanessa. She offered $75,000 if I waived further claims, accepted the current property division, agreed not to contact Astron employees, signed a broad non-disparagement clause, and left the Seattle metropolitan area for at least 1 year. I read the geographic restriction twice. Vanessa was not only trying to remove me from her life. She was trying to remove me from the company investigation before the December 20th vote. Chapter 8. The price she put on my silence. Aaron met me the next morning with the proposal printed and marked in red. "This is not a normal residential restriction," he said. "She is asking you to leave an entire metropolitan area even though there are no children, no protective order, and no allegation supported by evidence. She wants me away from Astron. That is my reading, but we do not accuse her without proof." I rejected the offer without a counterproposal. During mediation, Vanessa described the restriction as protection from harassment. Aaron placed my communication record on the table. Every message concerned legal scheduling, property retrieval, or account information. There were no threats, no repeated calls, and no visits outside the agreed times. I looked at Vanessa. Why does it matter whether I live near Astron if I am only an irrelevant contractor? Her attorney objected that the question was outside the purpose of mediation. Vanessa said nothing. The corporate interviews began that week. Priya and the Bexley and Rowe team questioned Vanessa under the audit committee's authority. I was not in the room, but I later read the transcript. Vanessa said she had not negotiated personal benefits before board approval. She said she did not know the true seriousness of QIR 24-117. She denied ordering the deletion of my report. She claimed she had no meaningful authority over the flag shipment. She insisted that her relationship with Grant had not influenced corporate decisions. Grant gave a similar account, but the two versions did not align. He said Westbridge first discussed management equity in late September. Vanessa said the subject arose in October. Metadata showed she had opened the side letter in August, for weeks before signing the no material risk certification. Expense records identified a weekend at a Vancouver resort that Grant and Vanessa labeled a strategy retreat. A Westbridge calendar showed a private transaction meeting took place during the trip. The dates also damaged Vanessa's claim that her relationship with Grant began only after she had emotionally left our marriage. Company records showed adjoining rooms, shared meals, and private appointments months before she filed for divorce. The affair hurt, but by then it was not the most important evidence. Maya provided the original draft of QIR 24-117 from an automated compliance archive. The system had attached the draft to a routine preservation record before anyone altered it. The original language described the risk as potentially serious and recommended a shipping hold. The final version called it a routine manufacturing variance. Priya's preliminary report identified probable conflicts of interest, retaliation, document manipulation, and disclosure failures. Evelyn came to my apartment with a copy. "This supports immediate removal," she said. "You do not need to wait for the shareholder meeting." I read the summary twice. Westbridge still believes the license will transfer automatically. Yes. The board has not formally considered the side agreements. No. And Vanessa and Grant have not been given a final chance to correct their statements. Evelyn studied me. "You want the record complete. I want them unable to say they made a single mistake under pressure. Send written questions. Allow supplemental disclosures. That may give them time to coordinate. The metadata is preserved. The documents are preserved. Let them choose." Priya sent each executive a detailed list of inconsistencies. The letter explained that they could amend prior answers without automatic adverse inference if they corrected errors fully and promptly. Grant submitted a supplemental response blaming incomplete information from quality staff. Vanessa signed a declaration insisting that every material decision had been proper, that her compensation discussions occurred within normal procedure, and that no known safety issue required disclosure. Her second signature mattered more than the first. A person could misunderstand one meeting. A person could rely too heavily on a superior. But Vanessa had received the original report, the side letter, the shipping records, and a written opportunity to correct herself. She chose the false version again. On December 12th, the final shareholder materials were distributed. Grant's presentation listed the FlowShield license among the assets that would transfer automatically to Westbridge. It described the quality concern as resolved. Evelyn called me after reviewing the packet. He plans to rely on the drag-along provision, she said. He wants the shareholder vote completed before Northlight's separate license consent is considered. Can he force the shares? He can argue for it. The provision cannot force an intellectual property trust to transfer an external license. Then we let him make the argument in front of Westbridge and the board. The meeting remains scheduled for December 20th at the Rainier Grand Hotel. The same place where Vanessa had handed me divorce papers would now host the vote she believed would make her wealthy. Chapter 9. The morning she thought she had won. On December 20th, I began the morning in my father's workshop. I placed his watch on my wrist and wore the same charcoal suit from the October Gala. The jacket still carried a faint crease where the security guard had touched my elbow while escorting me out. Evelyn reviewed the order of proceedings at the workbench. Shareholder vote. License consent question. Audit committee report. Board personnel actions. No spectacle, I said. I know. No announcement to employees until the board process is finished. I know that too. She closed her folder. Daniel, the spectacle was created before you entered it. That does not mean I have to add to it. Vanessa arrived at the Rainier Grand with Grant and the Westbridge representatives. She believed I would not attend because, in her understanding, I had no shareholder status. Before the meeting, she signed a proposed divorce settlement that still treated my family trust as a modest separate asset. Erin did not countersign because her compensation disclosures remained incomplete. In the ballroom foyer, Vanessa spoke to executives about Asteron entering a bold new era. Grant stood nearby, accepting congratulations before a vote had occurred. I waited in a private room with Evelyn and Erin until Priya signaled that the formal session had begun. Grant opened with a presentation describing the $420 million acquisition as the only responsible path forward. Westbridge would provide capital, expand distribution, and preserve Asteron's market position. He stated that production concerns had been resolved. Priya interrupted. The audit committee has not approved that representation. Grant maintained his smile. The operational issue has been contained. The audit remains active. We can address that after the vote. A Westbridge representative leaned toward the microphone. Before any vote, we need confirmation that the FlowShield license transfers at closing. Asteron's transaction counsel said management believed consent was automatic under the drag-along provisions. The conference room door opened, but it was Evelyn who entered first. She identified herself as counsel for Northlight Holdings and placed the license agreement on the table. Northlight has not granted change of control consent, she said. Grant's expression hardened. Northlight is bound by the shareholder drag-along. The drag-along applies to Asteron shares, Evelyn replied. The FlowShield intellectual property is owned by a separate trust and licensed to Asteron. The license cannot be transferred without written consent. The Westbridge representatives began whispering to their counsel. Vanessa leaned toward Grant. Delay the meeting. His microphone picked up part of her sentence. We cannot, he whispered back. The offer expires at midnight. Priya distributed the preliminary audit findings. Vanessa read the first page and looked up sharply. This is retaliation. Retaliation by whom? Priya asked. Daniel. Priya folded her hands. You have repeatedly described Daniel Mercer as an irrelevant outside contractor. Explain how he controls an independent audit committee. Vanessa opened her mouth, then stopped. Grant attempted to move to the vote. Priya refused. The shareholders will receive the conflict findings before acting on management's recommendation. Evelyn stood again. Northlight's beneficial owner is present and will exercise his voting rights personally. The doors opened behind her. I entered wearing the suit Vanessa had once considered evidence of my failure. Directors, attorneys, and buyer representatives rose because the controlling shareholder had arrived. Vanessa did not stand. She stared at me while Evelyn placed Northlight's voting certificate at the empty seat. I sat down, adjusted my father's watch, and looked toward the secretary recording the minutes. "My name is Daniel Thomas Mercer," I said. "I am here for Northlight Holdings." Chapter 10. The Owner in the Cheap Suit. The corporate secretary asked me to state my authority for the record. Evelyn submitted the ownership certificates, trust documents, and voting authorization. "Daniel Mercer is the beneficial owner of Northlight Holdings," she said. "Northlight controls 58% of Astron Medical Systems voting shares." Vanessa looked from Evelyn to me. "That's impossible." No one answered immediately. The documents were passed to Transaction Counsel, then to Westbridge's attorneys. Vanessa recovered enough to say, "He must have acquired them recently." Evelyn turned to the next schedule. 41% was inherited from Thomas Mercer. An additional 17% was acquired during Astron's 2018 recapitalization. That was a year before Vanessa joined the company. Grant's face lost its practiced calm. I addressed the secretary rather than either of them. "My father founded Astron. After his death, Northlight held and expanded the family interest. I remained outside daily management and operated through established governance channels." Vanessa shook her head. "You told me the trust was a private legacy arrangement." "It was. You let me think it was nothing. I let you think it was smaller than it was. I should have told you more. That failure belongs to me." Her eyes filled with anger rather than relief. "Our entire marriage was a test." "No, but I used privacy to avoid being fully honest, and that damaged us." Then I looked at the audit report in front of her. "Your right to leave the marriage is separate from this meeting. You are not being investigated because you divorced me. You are being investigated because of the decisions documented here." Priya began the formal presentation. She showed the original version of QIR 24-117, which classified the flow shield failure as a potential patient impact risk. She showed the revised version and Vanessa's approval beside the lower classification. Next came the management equity side letter, the shipment authorization, the deleted report, the incomplete board disclosures, the conflicting interviews, the supplemental declarations, and the retaliation against Maya and me. Vanessa interrupted only once. Grant assured me the defect was minor. Priya displayed an email attachment log. "You received the original risk analysis before signing the September 26 certification. I relied on his judgment. You also participated in the reclassification meeting and approved release of a flagged lot." Grant shifted in his chair. Strategic disclosures were Vanessa's responsibility. Operations provided input, but she controlled communications with Westbridge. Vanessa turned toward him. "You told me to sign." His own messages appeared on the screen. One instructed his assistant to remove my report. Another discussed keeping the quality matter outside the shareholder presentation. A third negotiated both his 4% management allocation and Vanessa's 2% allocation. Grant stopped speaking. I opened the leather notebook I had carried to the gala. "The flow shield problem is not a theoretical business risk," I said. "Under a specific low-temperature sterilization cycle, microscopic deformation can cause intermittent flow restriction under sustained demand. Standard bench testing may miss it because the component partially recovers before testing." A Westbridge technical advisor asked how I knew the design well enough to state that conclusion. "I helped design the pressure regulation mechanism," I said. "My name is on the early patent record." The advisor checked the file and nodded. I explained why expanded testing was required and why the license could not be transferred safely or legally while the issue remained unresolved. The Westbridge managing partner requested a recess. 10 minutes later, he returned. "Westbridge is suspending its offer," he said. "The due diligence record is materially incomplete." Grant tried to object, but Westbridge's counsel cut him off. This is not a negotiation. The shareholder vote still had to occur because the transaction had been formally presented. The secretary called Northlight. Against, I said. 58% ended Project Harbor. The company Vanessa intended to use as her escape had always been controlled by the husband she dismissed as poor. I felt no rush of triumph. I felt the weight of every person in Tacoma whose work had been put at risk and every hospital that trusted the Asteron name. Priya moved to the next item. She proposed suspending Grant and Vanessa pending final termination review. The independent directors approved the motion. Security personnel entered the conference room. Allow them to collect personal belongings under supervision, I said. Treat them professionally. Vanessa stood slowly. You planned this humiliation, she said. No. I planned a documented process. The humiliation came from the choices in the documents. What about us? This is not the place. It was the place when I served you. That was your choice. I will not repeat it. She looked at Grant, but he was already speaking quietly to an attorney on his phone. As Vanessa left, a Westbridge representative handed her counsel a notice withdrawing the employment and management equity proposals. She called Grant's name in the hallway. He did not turn around. Chapter 11. What her choice cost. The morning after the failed vote, Vanessa discovered that her Asteron email, badge, and executive systems had been suspended. Grant had retained separate counsel and stopped responding to her except through attorneys. During the investigation, Vanessa reviewed staffing drafts recovered from Project Harbor. Grant was listed as the future chief executive. Vanessa was listed as temporary chief growth officer for 18 months. After integration, Westbridge could replace her without accelerating the remainder of her equity. He had encouraged her to believe she was building a permanent future beside him. His own documents showed he viewed her as useful only until the sale was complete. That betrayal did not erase hers. She had signed the side letter. She had approved the quality downgrade. She had authorized the shipment and repeated false statements after being given a chance to correct them. Bexley and Rowe completed the final investigation over the next several weeks. The report found undisclosed conflicts of interest, inaccurate transaction certifications, quality report manipulation, retaliation, misuse of company funds, failure to preserve records, and improper shipment authorization. Grant and Vanessa were terminated for cause. Grant faced a separate civil claim for transaction expenses, document destruction, and breach of fiduciary duty. Vanessa lost unvested options worth approximately $2.4 million. She lost a potential $350,000 severance package, the Westbridge equity, and the executive role she had spent years building toward. I did not celebrate any of it. Asteron voluntarily disclosed the flow shield issue to regulators and customers. I approved a recall of all 3 affected lots. It cost the company approximately $18 million. There were 12 customer complaints and no confirmed deaths, but I refused to use the absence of a tragedy as proof that our response had been unnecessary. Maya led the corrective action team. Robert reorganized the testing process so no growth executive could override a quality hold without independent review. We retained every regular plan employee, even though reducing staff would have made the quarterly numbers easier. In March, Vanessa requested a private meeting through our attorneys. We met in a conference room at Hartwell Pierce. Erin and her attorney waited nearby, but allowed us to speak alone. Vanessa looked smaller without the executive armor she had worn for years. Not physically smaller, less certain. I read the final report, she said. All of it. I waited. I was wrong at the gala. I was wrong about Grant. I was wrong to hide the compensation and to sign those documents. She took a breath. And I was wrong about you. Which part? The way I treated you. The way I measured you. She explained what I already knew about her childhood. Her father had lost job after job, hidden debts, and eventually left Lydia to handle the consequences. Vanessa had promised herself she would never depend on a man who could not provide security. Every time you said you were content, I heard my father saying everything would work out while another bill went unpaid, she said. Grant made me feel like ambition was the only protection I had. I never asked you to depend on blind promises. You also never trusted me enough to tell me the truth. That is true. I did not defend it. I should have told her what Northlight was before we married. or at least when she joined Asteron. I had treated secrecy like proof of character. In reality, it had prevented the kind of honest financial partnership marriage required. Vanessa reached across the table, but stopped before touching my hand. Could we pause the divorce? Go to counseling? Her voice was sincere. That made the answer harder, not easier. If I still earned $72,000 and owned no company, would you want me back? She looked down. Seconds passed. I don't know, she whispered. That was the most honest answer she had given me in months. It was also the answer that ended the marriage. I believe you regret what happened, I said. But I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether you loved me or the security you discovered. I did love you. I believe you did once. That does not rebuild trust now. She cried quietly. I did not feel victorious. I felt sad for the people we had been before fear, ambition, and silence became more important than honesty. I'm not trying to punish you, I said, but I won't resume the marriage. Vanessa nodded after a long time. Lydia later told her something similar. Fear could explain one bad decision, she said. It could not erase 7 months of planning and repeated deception. Vanessa agreed to cooperate with the corporate civil settlement and corrected her divorce disclosures. Aaron filed the final papers. A few days later, I returned to Astron headquarters through the same glass doors where my contractor badge had flashed red. This time, the badge clipped to my jacket carried my actual role. Executive Chairman. Chapter 12. What I chose to keep. The security officer who had taken my old badge stood when I entered. Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. No, you don't, I said. You followed the instructions you were given. I had no interest in punishing people who had done their jobs honestly. That morning, I addressed Asteron's employees. I explained that Thomas Mercer had been my father and that Northlight represented the family's controlling interest. I also admitted that I had chosen to remain too distant from public leadership. I believed privacy protected the company and my personal life, I told them. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it created an absence other people used. I accept responsibility for that. I discussed the recall without exposing private divorce details. Quality reporting would now go directly to the board's audit and safety structure. Growth executives would no longer have authority to lower a safety classification. Maya became Chief Quality Officer with direct board access. Robert became Executive Vice President of Operations. Priya remained Chair of the Independent Audit Committee. I did not appoint myself Chief Executive. Ownership did not make me the best person to run every daily function. We hired an experienced outside CEO, while I became Executive Chairman and returned part-time to engineering review. The $18 million recall hurt. We absorbed the cost without closing the Tacoma plant or laying off regular production workers. Within 2 quarters, replacement orders and restored customer confidence began stabilizing revenue. Vanessa's civil settlement required her to repay $186,000 through vested compensation and personal savings. She surrendered the remaining disputed options and released her claims against Asteron. Grant remained involved in separate litigation over transaction expenses and destruction of evidence. Our divorce became final on March 28th. The premarital agreement was upheld. I retained Northlight and my Asteron shares. Vanessa kept her personal retirement accounts and undisputed savings. The Queen and townhouse was sold, and the remaining equity after the mortgage and costs was divided according to documented contributions and the settlement. Vanessa received no spousal support. Neither of us received punitive damages through the divorce. At the final hearing, she apologized once more. She did not ask me to reconsider. Several months later, Lydia told me Vanessa had accepted a lower-level operations role outside the medical device industry and started counseling. I did not investigate the company, call anyone, or interfere with her employment. Her future no longer belonged to me. I used part of my share from the townhouse to restore my father's workshop. I repaired the cabinets, updated the electrical system, and cleaned the old drafting table. On one shelf, I placed the early Flow Shield prototype, my father's watch box, and the contractor badge Asteron had returned after the investigation. The anniversary book from the recycling bin stayed in a drawer. I did not throw it away, but I stopped opening it. The leather tool case remained in active use. It had never been a symbol of poverty. It was simply a good case, worn smooth by years of real work. For most of my adult life, I had hidden my identity because I feared people would value me for money. Vanessa's betrayal taught me something less comfortable than the lesson I wanted. Secrecy could not manufacture genuine love. It could only delay the moment when honesty became necessary. By May 20th, I was back at the Tacoma plant reviewing the redesigned test protocol. I wore work clothes, not a suit. Robert walked me through the production line while Maya explained the new hold criteria. A young engineer hesitated before asking a technical question. He seemed unsure whether an owner wanted to discuss valve geometry. I set the leather case beside the line and knelt near the assembly fixture. "Show me the deformation point," I said. He handed me the component and began explaining his concern. Within minutes, 3 engineers had gathered around us, debating tolerances and sterilization cycles. Months earlier, I had crossed a hotel ballroom while people saw only a poor contractor being removed from a place where he did not belong. Now the employees knew my name, my ownership, and my father's history. None of that changed the work in front of us. The repaired line restarted while I stood beside the engineers who had helped save it. I had lost a marriage, an illusion, and the safety of being unknown. What I kept was better: my dignity, my responsibility, and a life that no longer depended on hiding the truth.